All right, well, in Rebel headquarters, so we started this show fairly recently, a couple of weeks ago. We've had a bunch of candidates on who are just Democrats running at the national level. But that's not all we want to do with the show, of course. We want to have all progressive voices, and we want this to be the headquarters for progressive movements. So I think today is a great example of that. We've got two folks for you who are not running at the national level, but doing things that are amazing at the state level. So first guest is a huge actor in progressive circles, so let me get into it. Ben Jealous is the former head of the NAACP. In fact, he was the youngest ever president and CEO of the NAACP. Unprecedented growth for the organization under his watch. He was a huge Bernie Sanders supporter during the 2016 race. He's a Rhodes Scholar, and he's now running for Maryland's governor position. So Ben, welcome to the Young Turks.
Thank you, Cenk. It's good to be here.
All right, great to have you. So let's just start nice and easy with, after having this storied background, what made you decide to run for governor in Maryland?
We have to make sure that our families move forward no matter what happens in Washington. And sort of irony of this moment in politics in our country is because of the states' rights movement, all of this power has been concentrated in our states over the last half century. And we as progressives need to understand that we can make sure that everybody in our state has health care, that our schools are fully funded by simply taking control of our states and having the courage to fight for the things that we really care about. So I'm running for governor of our state to make sure that we move forward no matter what happens in Washington.
But Ben, there's a lot of Democrats in this race. Why you as opposed to the other Democrats?
It's our state is a state, it's a very progressive state. We're a state with we're a very diverse state. And what I've found as I've moved across this state is that folks are responding to my leadership and to this campaign because we are fighting for real solutions to real problems. You won't hear me out here saying that we need a public option and that will solve our healthcare crisis, because quite frankly, even the Rand Corporation will tell you that will not solve your healthcare crisis, that will just maintain the status quo, and there's nothing more expensive than maintaining the status quo. Folks are responding to my campaign because I'm the only campaign out here saying we will make sure that everybody in our state has health care, regardless of what Trump does in Washington. We have the power to do it in our state, and we'll get it done. Similarly, take an issue like education. My mom helped to desegregate our schools here in Baltimore when she was 15 years old in 1955. And we knew back then that if we didn't fully fund our schools, that we would still have real problems. I'm out here very, very clearly saying that the shortfall is about $2 billion per year. It's less than 5% of our state budget. We're willing to make some tough decisions. We can fully fund our schools, and I'll make sure that we get it done. And so, frankly, it's all of that experience as an organizer, knowing how to pull folks together, knowing how to get big things done, that folks are responding to.
So before I get back into the Maryland race in particular, I mean, you mentioned your mom there. So your mom was black, your dad was white, and I didn't know this until recently. And it turns out that they could not get married in the state of Maryland before 1967, and they had to go outside the state to get married. That's amazing. That's in your, well, at least in their lifetime, yeah, right? Yeah. And I mean, how did that inform you growing up?
It's part of what drove me as president of the NAACP to get us to come out on the right side of marriage equality. For Julian Bond and I, it's a big project during our years running the association together. And what I knew was that it's that when the state allows itself to deem two people's union illegal, there's actually special punishments that are reserved for those people's children. I know how I was bullied even growing up just a few years after my parents' marriage had been made legal. The way that we got stares, the way that people said things, the fist fights I had to get into on the schoolyard defending my mom's honor, people saying that she must be my maid, all of those things. And fighting words in my public school if somebody called you rich. So, well, he's rich because he has a maid. I was like, no, that's my mom. Wow. And what my parents taught me is that that the real kind of origin of courage for each of us is love, and that there's nothing worth fighting for more than love, and that we have to bring courage to what we do every day. I mean, my dad was one of the few white guys in Baltimore to go to jail repeatedly to desegregate our lunch counters, and that was because he was a public school teacher who was outraged by the mistreatment of his school children, the black school children he was teaching at Harlem Park Junior High, when he was downtown on the weekends. And we fundamentally have to fight for all of our state's kids as if they're all our kids. That's what my parents taught me to do, and quite frankly, they inspire me every day.
So, if you guys, by the way, want to be part of Ben's campaign, the links are always down below in the description box on YouTube and on the comment section in Facebook. You can either donate or just go to his website, find out more. But also, to me, always the most important thing is to volunteer, because knocking on doors makes the biggest difference in calling people.
Absolutely.
So if you can't give your time, then give some money instead if you believe in Ben's cause. So the cause you believed in 2016, Ben, was Bernie Sanders.
Yep.
Now, you're arguably a stalwart in the Democratic Party. Why'd you go in that direction?
I supported Bernie for the same reason I supported Jesse Jackson back in '88, the same reason that Bernie Sanders supported Jesse Jackson in '84 and '88, which is that on those issues, those big three issues that Dr. King said, by which every leader should be judged, racism, militarism, and greed, he was the one with the clearest vision for fighting all of them. And in this campaign, we're very much building on what Bernie started. We're very much about finishing at the state level what Bernie started, ensuring that we get health care for everybody, that we fully fund education, that we make our public universities radically more affordable, and that we pay for it in part by ending mass incarceration, making sure that we, frankly, stop these senseless killings of unarmed people, typically unarmed black folks in our state, like Freddie Gray, and set a better model for the rest of the country. And so, I'm proud to have Bernie's support and to have the support of activists across the state who followed Bernie when I was co-chairing his campaign here in Maryland. So
you mentioned criminal justice reform there. What could you do as governor in Maryland to make that a reality in that state?
I'm proud to have led the successful effort about 5 years ago in Maryland to abolish our death penalty. And what frustrates me is that our state was poised then to go much further in actually fighting mass incarceration, and yet we're lagging behind states like Texas and Georgia, not to mention New York and California, in shrinking our prison system and frankly getting our dollars focused on rehab, and yes, even getting some of those dollars back over to help fund public higher education. As governor, folks can count on me to do what I helped the governor of Georgia do, which I helped activists in Texas do, and ultimately Rick Perry signed on to, which is to pass smart and safe policies that get us focused on getting the truly dangerous people off the streets, while making sure that people like addicts actually get the help they need, making sure that the 85% inmates are coming back to our communities, are actually rehabilitated and prepared for the workforce. Too long we've had people come out of our prisons just as illiterate as they went in. We should be making sure that each of them learn how to read. And I've been clear that as governor, I'll shrink our prison systems. I will focus them on, really focus law enforcement on getting the most dangerous people off the streets. And yet we'll make sure that everybody who's in prison ultimately comes back better educated and better prepared to make a real contribution to our society.
Well, just a couple of days ago, California legalized marijuana recreationally. It went into effect, but it wasn't just that. To me, the more important part was they said that anyone who was convicted of those low-level offenses could clear their record. Right. Because we've had presidents who smoked marijuana, we know did, and they'll at least never go to prison over it, and they clear their records, and then even said that they were going to favor the local communities that had been targeted before on the war on drugs in setting up the new businesses related to the legal industry. What do you think of those developments, and is that possible in Maryland?
Those are critical. Really being smart about ensuring that the communities who were, frankly have been most likely to how to say this, making sure that as you create a new industry, that you don't lock communities out is critical. Here in Maryland, one of our biggest scandals in the state is that this governor, as he has doled out the licenses for the medical cannabis industry, has not included one majority people of color owned company in a state that's 30% Black and has a significant Latino and Asian and even Native American population. Not one majority people of color owned company has gotten a license. Here in Maryland, we have to go further. We need to go further. I think California sets a good model of what's possible, especially when you look at employment, making sure that folks from hard-hit communities are included, making sure, quite frankly, that the poor don't just get poorer as you switch to a more rational policy. I fully support the legalization of cannabis for for the use of grown-ups by adults. At the same time, as a parent with 2 kids in the public schools, I want to make sure that we minimize any and we avoid any unintended consequences as far as our young people. But what we know is that our young people are already paying a price, Cenk, and it's not just young people paying a price because the enforcement is hugely racially disproportionate. There's a ton of discrimination in how these laws are enforced. It's also the homicides. My campaign talked to 3 police commanders in Baltimore City off the record, find out what's been happening as far as the homicides in the city. Each one of them said in the last 2 years, I'm not sure why they'd spiked so much, but when they look across the last 10 years, what strikes them is that approximately half of the homicides in the eyes of these three commanders, approximately half of the homicides were one set of weed dealers enforcing territory against another set of weed dealers. And that's the kind of hidden price of the drug trade that we don't talk about. And a lot of our young people have died in Baltimore because of the trade. And that's what happens when you can't regulate an industry through the courts. And it's so easy for young people to get their hands on this product and try to compete with others. So there's a lot of good that can come from us being more inclusive and more courageous on that issue.
All right, we're unfortunately out of time. I'd love to have you back on, talk about some of the other issues. And I'm curious as to how the Democratic Party is reacting to you in that race, because you should be the clear leader in that race, and just a really interesting dynamic. Well,
thank you, Cenk. Look, I would love to come back. We are, our campaign, my campaign's been in the top tier. My running mate is Susie Turnbull, who was vice chair of the Democratic Party under Howard Dean, and former chair of the Maryland Party back in 2010 when we turned out 125,000 more voters than we did in 2014. And we're actually building the only campaign in the state that's really unifying the party. After we were endorsed by Bernie Sanders, we were endorsed by Cory Booker. And so, that's what we've got to do. That's what Virginia and Alabama has taught us, that if we actually root ourselves in the sort of progressive policies that, we all preached in Bernie's campaign, and we unify the party around those policies, we can win. That's what this campaign is about.
Yeah, and from time to time, people in Washington tell me, where are your progressive stars? Well, you're looking at him, there he is, right? And so one of the more brilliant progressives in the country, Ben Jealous, running for governor in Maryland. Thank you for joining us, really appreciate it.
Thank you, brother.